Good afternoon from the new Senate office building. Behind me is the new Senate chambers, or the temporary ones, that they'll be using this session. They will be moving back into the Capitol hopefully next year to the old but refurbished Senate chambers, and then the House and the Senate will be close to each other. The House, however, is still holding session in the Capitol and their old Senate or their old House floor, which does not have running water, and I understand heat but if the weather stays beautiful, they won't need it. So it's going to be interesting how they communicate back and forth between the Senate and the House. They have always just had somebody run down the hall, and now they're going to have to go through the tunnel and hopefully do things on time. I think as far as expectations for this session, Greg David said it best. Either we're going to do it big or we're not going to do it at all. Big meaning they'll do taxes, transportation, and bonding, and some other things, education, health, but not a whole lot at this point in time. Or they will continue to disagree as they have been doing for the last few months, and they will go home. Senator Senjum said, however, that the people are interested in seeing something get done. For their vote, they want to see their legislators work and accomplish some good things for the state. Now I'm going to turn it over to John, and I wish you all well.
Hello, everybody. We are speaking to you on the eve of what will be a historic session. In modern history, there has never been a session that'll be as short as this, with one possible exception in the 1990s. And if that doesn't make things interesting enough, as mentioned, the House is in the middle of a construction zone, and all the complexities that are going to accrue to that complicated factor. Other things that we need to be aware of on the eve of this session, which starts tomorrow, is that the surplus, which was projected last November to be $1.2 billion, is now lost $300 million. And that has made things a little bit more difficult. Another problem we have going into this session is that the Republicans and Democrats' goals and definition of victory are about 180 degrees apart. When it comes to the surplus, the Republicans want to give most of it back and then use what they do not give back to fund some transportation investment one time. The Democrats have a different take on the surplus. They're willing to do some targeted tax relief, not in any massive amounts. They might make some investment in education. They're not interested in using it for one-time expenditure on transportation. So there's a vast difference in the way the House, which is controlled by the Republicans, and the Senate, controlled by the Democrats. There's a vast difference in the tack they're going to take with the surplus. Bonding. Again, there's a vast difference in the approach that the Democrats and the Republicans are taking. The Republicans are putting a substantial amount of transportation spending into it because they don't want to raise a gas tax or a sales tax. The governor's putting almost nothing in the bonding bill for transportation because he does want a future stream of revenue to cover transportation and transit development in the state. So there's a vast difference there. And so there was a press conference held about a week ago with the legislative leaders and the governor, and there was little in the way of harmony at that press conference. What it did is it accentuated the differences that all the players have as to what the goals of the session are and what are good outcomes. So that's usually in the beginning of the session, it's kind of happy talk, all these great things are going to happen. This session there's forebodings or portents of a lot of conflict to come. It'll be interesting to see what happens on the first day. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the legislative auditor's report on Minnesota teacher licensure. As you well know, there's been a lot of controversy over the way the state of Minnesota has done that, and it led to a legislative audit review, which results have been made available in the last week. Some of the key findings are, no surprise to us, that the licensing process is very confusing. You have two agencies in charge of it between the Department of Education and the Board of Teaching, and they're not communicating or coordinating very well together. Another problem is the legislature continually makes changes in the licensure law, which also add to the confusion. They found that the statutes contain undefined terms, which makes it even more difficult for people trying to divine what the rules are to do so. And then there's problems with multiple exceptions that are confusing, and loopholes that creates loopholes that make the licensure almost meaningless in some instances. They also found that the standards are more rigorous for Minnesota candidates than they are for out state, and it goes on and on and on. And so they made a series of recommendations, including their suggestion that the responsibility and authority for licensure be put under one or the other agency, but not both, so that it could be better coordinated. They need to clarify the statutes, and they have a host of other recommendations. But I imagine the legislature will be taking a look at this licensure issue, and maybe it'll be a little less controversial than a lot of the other things they're going to try to do. So, as I mentioned, we are speaking to you on the eve of what will be a session unlike any other that I've ever experienced in more than 4 decades, given the construction, the compression, and the fact that both sides are so far apart. But we'll be here fighting the good fight. Until next week.